You and I first met close to a decade ago. We were actually both members of the Coalition or Commission on Juvenile Justice here in Montgomery County. Remember that work?
I do. And see, your memory is better than mine. I didn't know that's where we met, but that makes sense.
That's where we initially met. Yeah. And so obviously this was a committee here in the county that was focusing specifically on juvenile justice legislation as it pertains to Montgomery County and to the youth who come into contact with law enforcement. And I juxtaposed that work with the news that came out today from the Justice Policy Institute that Maryland, the state of Maryland, leads in the rate of incarceration of young black men ages 18 to 24. When you read something like that, does that come as a shock, a surprise? What is it that Maryland is doing, or in some cases, or in many cases, not doing, that would allow for us to have such a terrible designation?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not that surprised because we've been top ranked in that statistic for a while. I would have hoped we would have made more progress, with some of the policies and the push. I think well-intentioned push at state and local level to change some of the things we're doing, whether it be school discipline or alternatives to incarceration and diversion programs and the like. But I always say, Maryland is the state that Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman ran away from. And we have a long, long history of racial discrimination in this state, and we have a high percentage of black population in this state, people, and so, and we have concentrated areas of poverty and lack of opportunity. And so when you mix that together, you get that kind of systemic systems, lack of opportunity approach and an incarceration model layered with racism where you're going to have bad outcomes. So I'm not extremely surprised. I would have hoped we would have made more progress, and it just is a kind of a reminder we've got a lot of work to do here in Montgomery County, the largest county in the state, and across the state in places like Baltimore and Prince George's and everywhere we find ourselves,
So considering that report and that information that came out, what I always find to be interesting is people's immediate responses locally to that kind of information at the state level. And almost 100% of the time, the immediate response from people that I talk to is, well, we've got Baltimore City, right? As if Montgomery County has no issue with disparity whatsoever.
Right.
And we know that not to be true.
Right.
While we bill ourselves as highly progressive, and we've got certainly currently a strong focus on equity, when you hear people say that, as if Montgomery County has no ills, what's your response to that?
Well, I think it's not telling the truth. I mean, or it's not understanding or knowing what the real truth is. I mean, I've talked a lot about, in my first year on the council, about the need to change the way we look at policing specifically and the criminal justice system holistically. When you have disparities like the fact that about 50% of the arrests in 2018 were people who were black, and we only make up about 18.5% of the population. On its face, and then when you ask, what's the reason for that? Well, I don't know. What are they being arrested for? I'm not sure. The data hasn't been looked into in that level of specificity. So if you look at those numbers, 15,000 arrests in 2018 in Montgomery County, half of them were black people. We're certainly contributing to that statewide number. It's one of these things where I think we are a great county, and you have to be able to hold that. We're a great state, we're a great county. You have to say we're a great county, but we have issues. And you can't be the largest county in the state and not be contributing to a statewide problem. Right. Or be a part of the solution, right? And so it's just not physically possible. We're 1.1 million of the 6 million in the state.
Right.
We're contributing to this issue.
Right. So along the lines of policing and incarceration, this evening, as a matter of fact, there's going to be a public hearing for a bill that was introduced that I believe that you're a co-sponsor on, around policing and around the importance of growing community policing. I've been hearing a lot of different, so to speak, kind of feedback from the community on this bill. And, there's some level of concern around the bill. as well as there's a certain level of excitement around the push for community policing and for police officers to actually get to know the communities that they police. Without getting too deep into it, considering that there's a hearing and this is just the introduction of the draft of the bill, what are your thoughts around this bill and where it's going to kind of go and what the intent is for the bill from your perspective as a co-sponsor of it?
Right, yeah, and my colleagues, Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Rice, are the lead sponsors. They drafted the bill. I decided to join because I wanted to have influence on the final product, and there are a lot of good things in the bill. It states forth a policy that says community policing, the idea that members of our law enforcement community know and are intimately connected to the people they are charged with protecting and serving, and that they have the right data set and metrics and things and the incentives to connect with people in the community. That's all good things. The data requirements in the bill, good things. And so I think too often in the past we kind of say community policing, and for some people they hear just more police. And that's fair because that, for many people, has been an issue. It's not enough to just put more people on beats in communities. If those folks aren't trained, if they aren't culturally competent, if they don't have a philosophy that's about de-escalation and solving problems and helping people in communities as opposed to arrests and violence and escalating, if you have more police, you're going to have that view, you're not going to have good outcomes. And so I think we need to have that more holistic conversation. I see this bill as a vehicle to have that conversation. There's some question on the school resource officers, and I share concerns on putting, again, just more police in schools, depending on who they are, what their training is, why they're there. And there's a lot of data on SROs not actually having the opposite effect of increasing incarceration for young people. So we certainly don't want that to happen. So I think we'll have a robust debate. We'll have testimony tonight, and it'll go to committee and the legislative process. I think we'll get something good at the end of the day.
Great. Yeah, certainly that's a lot of the feedback that I've received from a lot of folks in the community is their concern around the proliferation, especially of or primarily of school resource officers in middle schools, which happen to be an emotionally and mentally tough time for young people as they enter into adolescence.
Right.
And so
I know I was unstable.
Well, I think we all were. I think it's rare at that age to find a young person who has control completely.
Yeah.
Of their faculties, especially given what we know now about adolescent youth development and how long it takes to actually age into being an adult,
right.
Which is why we see in many other countries the juvenile justice system running all the way through the age of 23, 24,
yep.
Right? When the brain technically or biologically speaking is supposed to be fully formed. So we're all, I think, looking forward to that conversation and to see exactly what the final bill looks like when it finally comes out.